you, Council. Just to let everyone know that we do have Councillor Hall participating virtually, and we also have General Manager Kathy Hoffman on the virtual call also. The land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that we are on the lands of a Anishinaabe nation. This spot where we gather is the traditional lands of the Three Fires Confederacy, the Ottawa, Potawatomi, and Ojibwe. We also recognize that this land is now home to the Delaware Nation. This land was settled through the McKee Purchase Treaty of 1790, and we as beneficiaries of the treaty must recognize our responsibilities, including our collective responsibilities to the land and water. Rules for the council chambers. The municipality of Chatham-Kent supports open meetings that welcome debate and public policy issues in an atmosphere of inclusiveness, integrity, civility, fairness, and respect of differing points of view. Anyone conducting themselves in a way that disturbs, disrupts, or impedes the orderly conduct of the meeting, interrupts or makes derogatory statements or hate speech, defamatory comments about councillors, staff, speakers, or fellow members of the public may result in removal from the premises. This also applies to deputations. We ask that you do not approach council members if they are seated in their council seats, and the public, unless invited, is not permitted to come in the gated horseshoe area. The use of posters, signage, and literature is also prohibited. Mr. Chair, we have no disclosures of pecuniary interest this evening, and we'll now move on to presentations. The Municipality of Chatham-Kent 2025 Annual Operating Budget Update, and I'll pass it over to Mayor Caniff.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Through the chair, I just had some opening comments and then I'll pass it back. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us tonight for the opening of the 2025 budget process. I want to reflect on the shared commitment that drives this process, the desire to build a Chatham-Kent that reflects the values, ideals, and aspirations of our residents. Our budget is more than just numbers on a page. It is a roadmap towards the future, guided by our council's strategic plan and the priorities of the people we serve. Let's look at where we are now compared to last year. There was talk in the committee of 9.4% increase, and here we are opening at 5.96%, even before deliberations have begun. That's a reduction of 3.4% or $7.5 million because of the amazing work the executive management team has done to find efficiencies and cost reductions throughout the organization. I want to thank the residents of Chatham-Kent for their continued engagement in this vital process. The feedback, ideas, and concerns we receive play a critical role in shaping a budget that balances our community's needs with fiscal responsibility. We are listening, and your voices help ensure that our shared vision for Chatham-Kent becomes a reality. During this year's update, we work to maintain the essential services our residents rely on, services delivered by dedicated and skilled staff, while finding a balance between service levels and fiscal responsibility. You will see later in tonight's presentation that continued operations came in under 2%, well below the current rate of inflation. Myself and all council are very aware of the challenges facing our municipality and many others across Canada. Social issues such as homelessness, affordable housing, community safety, and long-term care are placing increasing demands on our resources. These are not just financial challenges, they are human challenges, ones that profoundly impact the lives of our neighbors, friends, and families. While we continue lobbying upper levels of government for financial help, it took over a 2% tax increase to fund the actions Council has already approved on Monday nights. Unfortunately, the burden of addressing these issues is increasingly being downloaded onto municipalities, often without adequate financial support from provincial and federal governments. The cost of maintaining infrastructure has doubled over the last decade. If upper levels of government provided their fair share, property tax increases would fall below 3%. While we continue to advocate for the assistance we need and deserve, the reality is that municipalities are now shouldering more responsibilities than ever. Despite these pressures, there's a lot to be optimistic about. Chatham-Kent's economic outlooks remain strong. We are experiencing significant population growth, and many of our local businesses continue to demonstrate resiliency and innovation. There are encouraging signs that position us well for the future. I'd like to specifically point out the tremendous success of our Community Improvement Plan and CIP program. We see a bright future when increased levels of new assessment come online and help us renew our aging infrastructure. I look forward to the recommendations coming to Council for the Parks and Recreation Master Plan and the Transportation Mobility Master Plan in 2025. I'd like to thank our Budget Performance Services team who have continued to enhance budget transparency and upload the highest standards of municipal budgeting practices. Their dedication reflects our commitment to responsible and effective governance. As we begin this process, I encourage all of us, council, staff, and residents, to continue working together in the spirit of collaboration and determination. We are starting this budget process at 5.96, well below where we thought we would be. This is extremely encouraging as we begin a budget update that will undoubtedly come with some tough decisions and could impact Chatham-Kent for years to come. Together, we will navigate the challenges we face, seize the opportunities before us, and move our community forward toward a prosperous future for all. Thank you, and let's get to work.
Thank you, Mayor Caniff. I believe I am passing it over to Gord or Steve now. No, to me. Oh, to me. Okay, so I will start. Thank you, Mayor Caniff, for those comments. So we have a few slides to go through that reflect decisions we made in this multi-year budget process. So I think it's good to start with remembering we're in year 2 of our multi-year budget process. As we can see on this slide, the approved increase that we tentatively approved last year during the process was 8.17%. So that was the direction that we as council or budget committee had given for this year's starting point for an approved increase. Subsequent to that, EMT went away to make sure that the budget continues to be aligned with council priorities. As part of that process, there's a noted 1.31% cost increase and recommendations. So these are related to unexpected items or increases based on decisions that we made as council and recommendations from administration. So it includes things like increased insurance expense, the increased cost related to the transitional cabin program as well. So this increase, that 1.31%, equates to about $3.2 million in increased costs. This increase was offset by a tax decrease of nearly $7.5 million, or 2.52%, from efficiencies, revenues, and recommendations from administration, and a 1% reduction with new OMPF announcement, which brings us down to that 5.96%. This decrease was developed by looking at service level decreases, some increased revenue opportunities, and decreases in some expenses that were found during the budget review process. These decreases are contained within business cases, and you can see those in the 2025 annual update budget. The most significant business case impacting service levels is the emergency cabin program, as we mentioned. That's an addition of nearly $1.3 million in the annual budget update. That represents over half of the expected cabin operating costs, with the remainder of that cost coming online in the 2026 budget. So as we remember, that shelter program was previously budgeted as a one-time expense, so we were using some reserve funding for that, but that reserve balance is depleted, and the program is going to have to be moved to the base budget. As part of the development of the annual budget update, staff were tasked with looking for new revenues, some service level changes, and other areas where expenses could be reduced. As part of this review, and due to the increases in the Ontario Municipal Partnership funding, tonight there's business cases presented which will reduce the budget by over $7.5 million. The base business cases included some increases in user fees for museums, camps, savings produced on our janitorial services contract, and a service level change for gravel roads, the elimination of applying dust suppressant in the summer, resulting in a $1.4 million savings into the base budget. Reflected tonight, but not in our budget documentation due to time, is also a $2 million increase in our OMPF funding. As part of the development of the budget update, staff also looked at reserve balances to determine if the balance was appropriate or in excess of the desired purpose. As a result, nearly $1.7 million in reserve transfers were paused in 2025 to bring the reserves in line with an appropriate balance. Based on all of the one-time business cases that are included in the annual budget update, the tax increase being requested in 2025 is 2.21% lower than was approved last year in our multi-year budget process. We often share this next slide through our budget processes to understand where we sit in relation to other municipalities in the province. So this chart shows municipalities with populations over 100,000 and the relative tax burden for a detached bungalow home. So a regular detached bungalow you might find on Tweedsmuir or Erie Street or anywhere in Chatham-Kent, and their approximate tax burden. So we can see Chatham-Kent, fortunately, is at the far left of this graph with a tax burden of around $3,500 for that single detached bungalow. And you can see a number of other municipalities over 100,000 are in that ballpark, with some being quite a bit higher over to the right. Markham with nearly a $7,000 per home tax burden for that same home that you might find in Chatham-Kent if it were to be placed in Markham. This is from the BMA Management Consulting Study. It's a report that is a third-party report that we evaluate every year, and that gives a good indication of where we sit relative to other municipalities. We don't anticipate this graph to change much based on the multi-year budget that's been presented, and it's anticipated that we'll remain in this position relative to our comparators. And when we compare with some other communities that also have strong mayor power, so there's 29 of them in Ontario, their average 2024 budget increase was 5.53%, and our 2024 increase was exactly that, so right in line with the average. With the proposed tax increase this year, 2025, of 5.96%, we expect that to be in line with what other municipalities in Ontario are facing. We'll have those available comparators for 2025 budgets available throughout the budget committee meetings and at the November 26th meeting. So now I will turn it over to Gordon Steve.
Thank you, Budget Chair McGregor. I just have a few comments to make. I'm Gord Quinton, your Chief Financial Officer. Administration is focused on delivering on Council's strategic directions or remaining a low property tax municipality for our residential taxpayers. As Brock just pointed out, we have the lowest residential property taxes across the province of our comparators in the BMA study, and we intend to remain low. We have very efficient staffing levels, and our services are leanly delivered, as demonstrated in the independent KPMG study that the previous council ordered and paid for. In this 2025 budget update, we face several levels enhancements in reaction to social issues, something property taxes are not designed to fund. So I really wish this wasn't, that the social issues that we're facing tonight weren't on property taxpayers and were paid for upper levels of government. With the minimal help that we've gotten from the upper levels, we are delivering a budget that balances these new costs with finding greater efficiencies and recommending service level cuts to costly ineffective services. Chatham-Kent is financially sound and operating very well. And I want to remind everyone that municipalities have to ask council, every municipality has to ask their council for an inflation adjustment, where at the upper levels, they just automatically get it as part of the income taxes or commodity taxes that just automatically bring up the revenues for the federal and provincial governments just because of inflation happening. We have to ask council for that this year, and this year it's that 1.84% that we're asking for inflation. On the Ontario Municipal Partnership Fund announcement by the province that just came on October 30th and added $50 million across the province to reestablish funding at levels of $550 million for the eligible municipalities. That's the same level as that it was at in 2018. The level was at $550 million, was cut in 2018 to $500 million. We've stayed there till now. Now got a surprise announcement bringing back to where we were in 2018. But of course, what we can buy today is not the same that what we could buy in 2018. So we're still missing out on an inflation adjustment. So we've lost significant purchasing power. In the fall economic update, there was a further promise of additional $50 million to come in 2026, but that's contingent on what a likely spring election at the provincial level, and so is not yet included in our 2026 projections. We hope to get another $2 million something in 2026, but we can't count on it yet. It's just an idea at this time. This This increased OMPF grant, as well as new application-based grants for capital projects are now becoming available, are good signs that the province has received loud and clear the messages from AMO and this council that we can't do it all alone. We're a good start. We're hearing some good things lately, so I don't want to be all doom and gloom on the province here. We do have some hope. And just want to remind everybody that the OMPF announcement was received after the budget was printed, and so on the budget book, the big binder that you have on your desks, that went to print at 6.96 before this 1% reduction. We'll be coming to the November 26th meeting with an update of how we've allocated the OMPF funds in detail. This was the first budget update of the 2024 to 2027 multi-year budget, and we're learning more every day, but I'm happy to report that there were staff time savings in the update process compared to our regular annual budgets. Multi-year budgets allow staff to focus on council strategic directions instead of the administrative processes of a budget. And council, you'll find the materials we need to go through on November 26th will likely take much less of your time as well as most of our plans to implement your strategic plans were detailed in the multi-year budget. And lastly, I just want to clearly say to the public and council that the multi-year budget and tonight's update documents are extremely transparent between the two years. There's now over 3,000 pages of details posted on the website. And in this age of online comments and damaging misinformation, you need to know that we take great pride in delivering a fully transparent, industry-leading budget. Last comment before I go on the next slide is just a personal comment. When is a better time to invest in Chatham-Kent? We've gone through a lot in the first quarter century here, but it's time to invest. Next slide, please. Thank you. Just wanted to go over one slide on strong mayor powers, and I'm going to read it. I know it's small on the screen, but due to the extension of the strong mayor powers to Chatham-Kent, some revisions to the budget process were required. Under the Municipal Act and the related regulations, the mayor is required to present a budget to council, not may, it's a requirement. The mayor has issued direction to the CEO and CFO to prepare and present the budget tonight, and council has 30 days now to review and amend the budget. Once council has completed its review, the motion passed by council is no longer to approve the budget, but it's rather council will pass a motion to end its review and amendment process. It will then go back to the mayor for a 10-day time period where the mayor could veto any amendments, and the mayor can shorten this time period if he does not wish to veto any amendments. If there does happen to be any amendments, council will then have 15 days to attempt to override any mayoral vetoes, but with a 2/3 vote. And so what that really means is that we may have to schedule another budget committee meeting after the mayor reviews the recommendations from the committee. We don't expect to, but just that is a possibility through the act. And just to be clear, these are calendar days, not working days referenced. In closing, I'd like to thank all of Chatham-Kent staff, top to bottom, everyone that contributed to producing the 2025 budget update. And with that, I'll turn it over to Steve for the rest of the presentation.
Thanks, Gord. 2024 marked the beginning of Chatham-Kent's first multi-year budget. The 2025 annual update is not only the first annual update of the multi-year budget, but also that council administration have had the opportunity to participate in. Over the next few slides, we'll provide a quick refresher of the multi-year budget process and highlight the criteria for each of the 3 budget amendments which go on to form the 2025 annual update. The budget update includes any changes as budget amendments. The annual budget update provides an opportunity to adjust the budget and provide flexibility for circumstances that may require funding or resource adjustments. While the Municipal Act allows for municipalities to adopt multi-year budgets, it also states that those budgets must be readopted annually to allow for any changes to ensure a balanced budget. Following Chatham-Kent's multi-year budget policy, there are 3 classifications of amendments that can take place. The first type of budget amendment for the multi-year budget is new council direction. Council sets the priorities, and if any new or changed direction requires a change to the business plans or budgets of the multi-year budget, it will come back as a council to council as a budget amendment. The second type of budget amendment are those for cost drivers. Over the last several years, we've had to deal with significant increases in contracts and inflation. These would have been unanticipated changes in economic conditions that would have needed to come back to council for consideration of a budget change. The third type of budget amendment are those that are created due to new or change in regulation. Examples of items that would fall into this category of budget amendment would be changes in the federal or provincial funding for such areas as public health, employment, social services, housing, and even our Ontario Municipal Partnership funding. Linking council's strategic priorities to departmental business plans and subsequently the adoption of the 4-year budget creates an integrated, long-term approach aligning council's strategic priorities to funding plans for the implementation. It can't be stressed enough that the implementation of a multi-year budget is not a one-time exercise, but one that must be reviewed and adopted annually through annual budget updates, which brings us to tonight's first annual update. Switching to a multi-year budget provides the residents of Chatham-Kent with greater certainty of their future taxes, along with implementation timelines of council's strategic plan. Chatham-Kent's annual budget survey is an informative way for staff and council to learn about the community's priorities for spending and which services they identify as most important. As in past years, our budget survey was launched through Let's Talk Chatham-Kent. A total of 506 responses were received from the budget survey, which was launched in September, and the full results are available on the Chatham-Kent Municipal Budget website. The survey respondents were a diverse mix of homes and business owners from across all 6 wards of Chatham-Kent. These individuals provide important insights into the sentiment towards the budget topics in the municipality. A total of 406 survey respondents were homeowners and closely matched Chatham-Kent's population demographics, with nearly 54% of the respondents either residing or owning a business in the city of Chatham. 87.6% of the survey respondents believe that the province should be funding at least half the costs associated with the emergency shelter and support. To fund Chatham-Kent's large funding gap and maintain its infrastructure, survey respondents were split between reducing services, increasing provincial funding, and divesting of infrastructure. 19% believe that we should divest of infrastructure, 37% believe we should reduce services, and 40% believe provincial funding should be increased. When asked, 61% of respondents would prefer to have user fees increased to lessen the tax impact of services, while 29% would prefer to reduce services to lessen the tax impact, and 10% would prefer to keep the user fee stable, increasing the tax impact of these services. Over the next several slides, we'll take a look at the budget process, the impact of budget increases on residential homes, and requested base FTEs. Chatham-Kent's multi-year budget took into consideration council's term priorities and community feedback. The 2025 annual budget update process began in May 2024 when staff started preparing their divisional budgets, which went through both an internal staff and EMT review from June to October. As part of the strong mayor powers, the mayor provided budget direction in August, taking into consideration responses that were received from councillors as part of an earlier communication from administration. Tonight, council and the public receives the annual 2025 budget update, and over the coming weeks, the public will have an opportunity to provide feedback and ask questions as council begins its review on November 26. The 2025 annual budget update includes an annual tax increase of 5.96%. This equates to a tax increase of $211 for the average Chatham-Kent household, with an assessed value of $176,200. We need to remember that we are still working off the 2016 assessment figures and not current sales figures. The impact per 100,000 of assessment is $119. The 2025 annual update includes 17.05 new tax-funded FTEs over and above what was included in the multi-year. 14 of these positions are for the homeless cabin shelters. As we mentioned previously, the shelter was included in the multi-year budget up to May 2025, but would be included in the annual update if no federal or provincial assistance was received before this date. These positions were previously one-time funded from reserve, but are being made permanent as part of this update. The initial stages of the fire master plan implementation calls for an additional 3 staff, 2 district chiefs, and a project coordinator. As part of the multi-year budget, fire and emergency services were allocated $500,000 annually from 2025 to 2027, half of which was being funded from assessment growth. As a result of the funding for these positions was part of the original 8.17 approved in the multi-year budget, but the business cases are included in this budget update for FTE approval. The remaining 0.05 FTE is required due to the increase in municipal assets that have been created as a result of the council award funding program. When looking at the total staffing additions over a 10-year period from 2018 to the end of this multi-year budget in 2027, tax-funded FTEs have increased for municipal operations outside of police, Riverview Gardens, and the cabin project by a total of 10.72. So this equates to less than 1.1 FTE per year. Riverview Gardens has increased staffing levels by nearly 100 FTE over the 10-year period, primarily as a result of the 4 Hours of Care initiative that was mostly funded by the province. The significant increase impacts other municipal departments, such as human resources, payroll, and ITT, who have had to manage the new staff, and in some cases, have had to add staff themselves to complete the extra workload. Inflation on both our operating and capital budgets continues to have significant impacts. Inflation included in the multi-year budget for 2025 was 2.5%. Budget inflation is always 1 year behind actuals, meaning a 2025 budget is based on 2024 actuals. In the most recent Bank of Canada Monetary Policy Report, inflation for 2024 is projected to be 2.6% at the end of this year, resulting in no needed changes to the 2025 inflation figure budgeted as part of the multi-year budget. We all hear the monthly news releases on the Canada Consumer Price Index, and we've all experienced it when we go buy groceries and goods. The CPI attempts to measure the price increase on average person faces a month for items such as housing, food, and housing operations. Municipalities face cost pressures as well, but the basket of goods is quite different, and it contains items such as labor, equipment, and specialized items like asphalt. Many of the price increases experienced at the municipal purchasing level have experienced price inflation much higher than that of regular CPI, and in some cases over 25%. These increases started to normalize in 2023. However, most are still above the regular CPI, which we discuss and hear about in the news. It is likely that a large proportion of these increases that we have seen are now permanently embedded within these costs. Statistics Canada does not track MPI, so we often don't use it, but we use CPI as our benchmark. When comparing Chatham-Kent's tax increase since 2015 to both the regular consumer price index and the municipal price index, our overall increase falls in line with the consumer price index, with a cumulative tax increase of only 1.5% higher than that of CPI. When comparing our municipal tax increase to the municipal price index, Chatham-Kent's 10-year increase falls more than 9% below that of MPI. The inflation built into the budget each year is the inflation of the year prior. Inflation in 2023, which was used for the 2024 budget year, came in at 3.9%, which is slightly higher than the 3.7% used in the budget. The inflation included in the multi-year budget was based on forecasts from the July 2023 Bank of Canada Monetary Policy Report. In the July 2024 Bank of Canada report, inflation is also projected to be slightly higher than budgeted for both 25 and 26, but is in line with the original estimates requiring no changes as part of this 2025 budget update. The cost of infrastructure is a significant portion of the 2025 annual update increase at 2.06%, which is over 34% of our recommended annual tax increase. The capital budget is broken out into 3 categories: capital new, capital asset management plan, and maintenance, with a subsection related to amendments to previously approved capital projects. During 2024, a review of the previously approved projects was completed to either merge similar projects, change the scope, or defer to future years based on current capacity. The 2.06% listed for the capital asset management plan is comprised of two parts: the capital levy and inflation on the capital budget. In June 2022, Council committed to adding 1.5% tax equivalent to the asset management plan and submitted the plan to the province as required. In addition, Council committed to providing inflation adjustments, which as part of the 2024 to 2027 deliberations was reduced from regular CPI plus an additional 2.3% to regular CPI plus an additional 1% to adjust for the municipal price index, as mentioned when discussing CPI. The inflation converts to a 0.9% average annual tax increase. A portion of the new OMPF announcement, those funds were applied against the infrastructure inflation, resulting in a lower increase down to 0.56%. Chatham-Kent property taxpayers are being asked for $4.2 million in the 2025 budget update to keep our asset management plan on track. Over the next several slides, we'll take a look at how tax policy impacts taxes, some property tax information, and some municipal comparators. Chatham-Kent's large size and geography presents numerous challenges to the municipality and its overall budget. This slide highlights some of the many areas where Chatham-Kent is unique and the reason why it's difficult to compare Chatham-Kent to other municipalities. While Chatham-Kent has only 0.7% of the Ontario population, we have over 20% of the municipal drains and 5% of the bridges. And with only 44 people per square kilometer to pay for all of the infrastructure and the services, there are significantly less people to pay for those same services versus places like Windsor and Sarnia. Because of our large geography, we must also maintain and staff 10 arenas, 11 library branches, and 11 public works garages. The budget process determines the overall financial requirements of the municipality, while tax policy determines which property class will pay what share of the overall financial burden. Tax policy is presented to Council in April and provides recommendations on tax ratio changes, which in turn may shift a proportion of the tax burden from one property class to another. Of the 5 items listed, Council has control over the first 2, the approved tax levy or budget and tax policy. The education tax rates and many property tax ratios are determined by the province. While the municipality has the flexibility to have lower ratios than prescribed by the province, we are not able to have tax ratios greater than those prescribed. So for example, the provincial prescribed limit for the farm tax ratio is 25% of a residential property. However, currently, Chatham-Kent has the farm tax ratio set at 22%. Tax policy also takes announcements from the province, such as education rates, and new legislation such as tax ratio limits, in determining how much of the total tax requirement each property class will pay. The largest portion of property taxes collected within Chatham-Kent come from residential properties at 63%. This is followed by commercial at 16% and farm at 11%. The proportion of property taxes collected from all property classes remains similar to that from 2023. The ability to pay is estimated by using the average household income, which varies for each community. This is an important check in determining the affordability of property taxes. BMA Management Consulting also computes this affordability check in our 2023 municipal study. For the average household in Chatham-Kent, property taxes represented 3.8% of their estimated income, which is in line with the provincial average and Chatham-Kent's comparators. And this is down from 4% as part of the 2022 municipal study. Debt available is calculated by a percentage of own source revenues. The province states that debt repayment should not be over 25% of your own source revenues, but Chatham-Kent's long-term financial strategy has this set at 17%. By 2027, Chatham-Kent's debt outstanding will be slightly less than $3.1 million, but following Chatham-Kent's own policy, the amount of debt we could take on is $620 million, and following the provincial policy, over $900 million using today's interest rates. As Chatham-Kent continues to pay down its existing debt, the additional borrowing that can be undertaken grows. This, along with reducing interest rates, helps make long-term debt a more attractive option to fund upcoming major capital projects. As with any long-term financial plan, debt funding will be considered carefully on a project-by-project basis to ensure a fair and equitable funding model that is in the best interests of the entire municipality. Available tonight on our website will be the 2025 annual update documentation, along with information pertaining to our online open houses. Residents are also encouraged to visit the CK Let's Talk budget page to provide feedback and ask questions. We'd like to also highlight Chatham-Kent's Open Book. Open Book is an online budget resource directed to the public that enables us to share budget and other information in an open, visual, and user-friendly way. Open Book is available for the public and council and provides high-level information in an easy-to-use and understandable manner. While our budget book includes much more detailed information, and is also available on our website. Open Book allows users to explore our operating budgets, capital budgets, view an interactive map of all of our capital projects, and much more. For example, presented here is an Open Book budget spotlight that allows the user to explore and compare the current approved multi-year budget to the proposed 2025 annual update. Users will be able to view our budgeted or proposed expenses. These budget lines can be organized by department or by the type of expense. You can drill down to see more specific details on the expense by clicking on the bars included within the bar chart. For anybody interested in learning more about the municipal budget in a quick and easily understandable format, visit our Open Book site to view this spotlight and many others like it. The link to Open Book is available under the budget section of our municipal website. The online public consultation format allows residents to submit questions prior to the Facebook Live events and watch either live or a recording at their convenience. To reach as many residents of Chatham-Kent and to ensure residents are able to ask questions, our 2025 annual update consultation will remain online. We have scheduled 2 Facebook Live events on Wednesday, November 20th at noon and Thursday, November 21st at 7 p.m. We have scheduled these events at different times to provide CK residents with an opportunity to not only learn about the budget, but to comment and have their voices heard. Deliberations on the 2025 annual budget update start the following week on Tuesday, November 26th at 6 p.m. Deputations can be submitted for the first night of the Budget Committee deliberations up to 12 p.m. on November 26th.
Thank you. Just before we move on, I'll turn it over to Mayor Caniff for a few comments.
Yeah, I just wanted to pull up a couple of slides in particular. I know we've looked at them, but I really want to emphasize a couple of things with this. The first one is the breakdown of the 5.96. I just like to, you touched on it, Steve, and went through it a bit, but I just want to emphasize a little bit more, if we can get to that. And the other slide afterwards, I'll be going to the inflation one as well. If you want to go to the inflation one first, well, okay, whatever one you're handy there. Okay, so the inflation one, when you look at that, that's a 10 years. So the last 10 years of tax increases, so focus on the blue line and the orange line. So if inflation was 0 over that 10-year period, we would have had basically 0% tax increase for 10 years. That's what this is telling us. So I didn't want to go back to 2 years or 4. I want to go back 10 years and say, what have we collectively been doing here as far as managing the finances? So for 10 years, we've basically covered inflation. So you can see it's up a little bit this year because of the increase. But so I really want to emphasize that as well. You know, but we were experiencing we're experiencing the MPI, which I'm not even going to go into, but it's much higher. So as far as management over the last 10 years, we've been managing at inflation when you average it out. Can we go to the other slide, please, Steve? Yes, that one right there. So going back, when you factor in the inflation, the reason we want to break this out in 3 manners, because it's 3 distinct buckets. So the first one is maintain existing services. Everything we do across the community, we're looking for 1.84% to maintain those services. CPI is 2.5%. So we are under CPI, following the same equation that we have been over the last 10 years. Then but through that as well, we've been adding to capital, not just the inflation on the existing capital spend, but adding new capital dollars to reflect that. 1.5 of that 2% reflects that, is we're increasing the ultimate spending we're going to do on roads and bridges and infrastructure that we need to do. As when we talk about our plan moving forward, it's getting really expensive. We talk about it doubling in cost for the last 10 years. This is our response to doing that. But through the OBCM, through FCM, through the Western Ontario Wardens, through AMO, this category right here, we're asking for help from the federal and provincial government. We need this, not just us. Municipalities across Canada are experiencing the same deficiency in capital as our capital infrastructure gets more and more expensive. So we really pull that out and say, this is what we're doing. But if those other levels of government stepped up, that would directly impact that as far as our costs and the taxes. The investment in social issues is the same thing. Two big things in there is the shelter we're doing, funding that, encampments, mental health, all those aspects of things. That's another thing that we're dealing with that, again, through those organizations that I mentioned, we are asking for help. And it's not, again, not just us, it is all of Canada asking for this, particularly Ontario. We'll talk about Ontario, that this, I want to break this out. So when you look at 1.84%, this doesn't say that the sky is falling. And we've got a bright future, as we talked about, as we looked and said, we have our population's growing, we're doing all these various things. So I would hate to start gutting things to get, when we look at this and we're saying, we're at 1.84%. When and if, and I'm hoping when the federal provincial government comes in, they can help with those other two. We start getting really in line with things. But as we move forward, as we talked about, this is a strategic document to talk about the future of our community and why people want to move here versus the other 443 municipalities in the province. So I just really want to highlight those two slides as we proceed on for the discussions. So with that, Mr. Chair, I'll pass it back to you.
Thank you, Mayor Caniff. Our next item is the 2025 annual capital budget update. So I'll turn it over to Marissa.
Thank you and good evening. So further to Mr. Quinton and Mr. Brown's presentation, I'm here to share a bit more information on our 2025 capital budget update. So what is our capital budget? So the municipality's capital budget is our capital investment plan for our community. It includes repairs, rehabilitation, and replacement of our existing infrastructure to meet current levels of service. It includes building new assets to provide service enhancements or meet strategic priorities, and addressing community needs to meet infrastructure and environmental challenges due to the impact of climate change, and integrating these with our municipal asset management plan. Our capital planning process recommends a multi-year plan to address the municipality's highest priority investment needs. This is based on planning for both life cycle investments and new capital funding through our capital reserves. Our capital planning process considers an organizational wide review of council priorities, service priorities, infrastructure needs, spending choices, risk, and financing options. Capital budget priorities reflect the best available and still evolving data about asset conditions, service performance, financing choices, and council strategic priorities. The result is a capital plan which is scoped based on appropriate resourcing and funding needed to complete the projects. To achieve this objective, starting back in 2023 for the 2024 multi-year budget, staff developed criteria in alignment with the principles of our strategic asset management policy. These included legislative requirements and risk, external funding considerations, asset needs, and strategic priorities. The recommendations were then formalized into a list of projects and a financing plan, which formed the basis for the capital budget presented to council for consideration. As Mr. Brown mentioned, this is our 2025 update to that multi-year plan. A full list of the municipality's 2024 through 2027 capital projects are included in the main budget book package, starting on page 87. New additions and project amendments, as mentioned, that form part of this 2025 update, are included in the 2025-2027 capital budget book package. And these include project amendments, as well as Mr. Brown mentioned, which include updates to projects that were approved as part of the initial multi-year budget, including merging of projects, updates to scope, timing, and/or funding. And as mentioned by Mr. Brown, this is an example of the open book software and specifically the Capital Project Explorer, where residents can see more details on all of our capital projects. So as mentioned, this is our 2025 update to the multi-year plan. Our first year of the multi-year capital budget included a detailed forecast for 2024 and started to build out the forecast for 25, 26, and 27. This update represents a fuller picture for 25 and further forecasting for 26 and 27 and represents 615 projects, programs, and envelopes across 10 asset categories. This includes bridges, roads, parks and recreation, social housing, transportation, environment, general government, operations and fleet, an engineering asset category which includes studies, broader right-of-way work, as well as stormwater and multidisciplinary capital projects. And new this year in the multi-year process, this also includes drainage infrastructure. Our 2025 update to the multi-year budget includes $449 million in capital investment based on continuing to build out our asset management plans and forecasting for work. Some highlights, this includes updated implementation of our stormwater master plan projects further to the recent report to council, capital drainage infrastructure work as mentioned, and additional forecasting for studies and building out programs and projects for rehabilitation and construction into 26 and 27. The majority of the funding covering the capital investment comes from the municipal tax-funded capital and life cycle reserves at 73%, followed by grants and subsidies from upper levels of government at 11%, funding from PUC reserves at 7%, with the remainder coming from operations, debt, and service recovery fees. So some highlights. The 2024 capital budget included $85 million of capital investment towards maintenance, renewal, and replacement of existing infrastructure, as well as new and upgraded assets that address community needs to meet infrastructure and environmental needs, as well as strategic priorities for the municipality. Some quick stats. On the linear infrastructure side, we completed over 60 lane kilometers of asphalt rehabilitation this year. This also included 45 kilometers of paved shoulder construction. We completed 13 bridge and culvert rehabilitation or replacement projects, 4 major road reconstruction projects, and 11 major slope and drainage infrastructure projects. Some examples, some of which are pictured on the screen, include the Kyle Drive and Tweedsmuir intersection improvements, 4th concession line over Baker Drain Bridge, Jacob Road Bridge over Var Drain, Country View Line Road resurfacing, Dufferin Avenue Road resurfacing, Hillside Avenue and Pier Road improvements, Wyandotte Street reconstruction, Selkirk and Memory Lane, Elizabeth and Lisgar Street, and Cathcart Street reconstruction. Other examples include completion of the new public works garage, new pedestrian crossings, new memorial crosswalks, as well as artistic bike racks installed in Merlin, Dresden, Chatham, and Tilbury. Continuing the list, we have slope stabilization and drainage projects, including those that are funded through our disaster mitigation adaptation funding program, such as the Longwood Slope Stabilization Project, and many drainage projects, some of which are illustrated. On the drainage side, we completed 10 capital drainage projects and over 640 kilometers of drain maintenance this year. Continuing the list, we have work at the 36 McGeorge Street Community Housing Build, 200 Westcourt Boulevard housing units, including siding and sidewalk improvements, Chatham Capitol Theatre, work at the Lanou House, including a new cedar roof, work at the Dresden Service Center on accessibility improvements, as well as other examples, some of which are pictured here, including the Fluker Trail installation in Memorial Park, new bleachers at the Wheatley Area Recreation Complex, a new safe swim zone in Erie O, Collins Park grounds rehabilitation in Chatham, new dock installation at the West Docks in Chatham, and batting cage rehabilitation at the Annie Johnston Field in cooperation with the Wellsburg Minor Baseball Association. Looking ahead to 2025, of the 615 projects and programs represented in our 2025 update to the 2024 through 2027 multi-year capital plan, over 200 of them will be initiated or underway this year. These include a number of our annual rehabilitation programs, including our roads and bridge life cycle work, implementation of our stormwater master plan projects, road reconstruction and sewer separation projects, continued implementation of our DMAF, disaster mitigation adaptation funding program, beginning to implement our gravel roads conversion program, undertaking some studies to identify planning for future sewer separation projects, next phases, transit vehicle replacements, as well as improvements at cemeteries, including a new columbaria at the Maple Leaf Cemetery, park life cycle improvements, life cycle work on our social housing buildings and municipal buildings, life cycle work at our arenas, continued work on building out our transitional and affordable housing builds, and fleet replacements. As council is aware, we just completed our detailed asset management plans for our non-core assets and are working on updates for our core assets and the overall asset management system for the municipality. As we continue to deliver on our current multi-year capital budget, we'll continue monitoring our successes and identifying opportunities for improvement. Annual updates to our multi-year plan continue to be informed by the development of our asset management plans, and looking ahead to our next 4-year capital budget will reflect further 10-year planning horizons, council endorsed levels of service, resourcing and funding requirements to achieve those endorsed levels of service, and risk, demand, and climate-related drivers and impacts. That concludes my presentation.
Thank you. We don't need motions for either of these two presentations, so I say with some caution, if we have questions that are directly related to those presentations, we can entertain those now. Councillor Sakachi.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just one quick question, maybe to Mr. Quinton or to Mr. Brown. When we're talking about the transitional cabins there, if there's additional fundings, I'm just still trying to wrap my head around about the 4-year, multi-year budget. So if there's additional fundings that come in, that money won't simply be transitioned into a reserve for future use. Will that be allocated to some additional budget items within this period?
Through the chair, a great question. To explain that a little bit more, it was one-time funded in the past from reserves. So up until the end of May of 2025, it's coming from reserves. But then we're transitioning it into the base budget. We're hoping that, and Jody's working very, very hard on this, is trying to figure out, is there ways that the province will help us with base funding of those operating costs, or at least some of the one-time of the $4.3 million capital costs. We don't know the answer yet, and we likely won't know, probably until either the province is at the end of their year end in March of 2025 with money to spend, or in their 2025-26 budget that they deliver in March or April, where perhaps there's funding across Ontario for to help with homelessness or things. So we're not going to know till well into 2025. The good news, I guess, if there's any in this, is that the 2025 budget is just to fund 7/12 of the budget from the June 1st to December 31st. So if we get partial operating funds, we'll just be able to lower what the ask is for 2026. If miraculously they came along and said, we're going to 100% cover the operating costs, that would be great. We'd come to council and make recommendations partway through the year as well. But we're not gonna have that answer. The cabins will likely be built and occupied before we actually have an answer from upper level. So.
Yeah, thank you. And just to Mayor Canada's point, my concern was just that if we start to get some, because there's so much lobbying going on, if we start to get these funds, that they're not transitioned just into a reserve, that we're able to utilize them kind of trying to address the problems right now. So kind of answered my question, but I guess we won't find out for a while. Thank you.
Councillor Harrigan.
Great, stay near the mic, Gord. So appreciate the presentations that we had tonight. My question is just following the capital presentation and the comment that Marissa had made about potential use of debentures for some of those stormwater projects, right? Which would turn something that could take 30 plus years to do into a 10-year project, potentially. From a budget perspective, though, we have some of those projects built into the capital budget. If in 2025 we make the decision to debenture, would we say, okay, those projects are already budgeted for, we won't think about that, and then start a debenture for the remaining projects? And then would that funding for that be in addition to next year's budget in capital, or would there be a separate place for it in our budget because it's debentured?
Thanks for the question. So we're not in need of debenturing money right away. We have reserves set aside for life cycle, and it's really Edward's team developing that long-term plan. For example, if it's a Tilbury stormwater plan, it's developing that long-term plan, which was delivered to council. Yes, 20 plus years. What if we were to shrink it down in the timeline? It still can only go so fast, because the disruption to the community of, you can't have every road closed at the same time, along with just finding the contractors to get the work done. So the need for debt isn't in this term of council. It's gonna be perhaps in the next term of council, though, if we do decide to compress the timelines there. We can get 30-year money right now at the same rates as the federal government. In some programs that have just come out that we weren't able to access a decade ago. It's recent changes, particularly if it can relate to housing, which stormwater relates to housing as well. We can get some pretty good financing. So when you compare it to the actual rate of inflation on our capital projects, the debt payments will actually be less than the potential inflation of waiting. As far as where it was be funding, the plan would still be to fund that out of the money for our asset management plan. It's to pay those annual debt payments, but it's spreading, instead of having the current generation pay for it all right now, like the last generation in Tilbury didn't pay for it. Instead of having the current generation pay for it all, it's stretching it out over a 20 to 30-year period. And we still know that plan will take 10 years, so it's actually going another 10 years past that. It's really a 40-year period of paying for it.
Great, thank you very much.
Councillor Bondi?
Excuse me. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just two quick questions. Council approved a 7.5% reduction in the budget, right?
So the item that we'll deal with after deputations is Councillor Doyle's motion, which approved a report on options that would equate to a 7.5% reduction in the budget. So
Okay,
it didn't
sure.
provide budget direction, but just we'll have that information report and we'll discuss that after the deputations too.
Right. So, okay, sorry. I'm sorry. I'm not presenting it properly. But would that be adjusted in that now the potential increase is not even 6%? Just for clarity, right? Like.
So I think the report was already produced. We did have the 6-ish number when we voted on that motion. So that number was already known. It wasn't down to 5.9. I think it was 6.9 at the time. But the report's already produced. So we have the report that related to the motion.
Oh, and then we can just carve it out from there. Right. Okay. Sure. Second question. We've heard a lot about the hub and that the money's coming from reserves. So this is I don't know if it's an appropriate question for this time, but maybe it is. I don't see it in our budget. So my question is, when we use reserve money, we're often told it has to be replaced, right? So I think it was Councillor Doyle last budget session wanted to use like $10 million to bring us down to a zero. So, and then it was argued that, well, that money has to go back in, so it's actually going to be a tax increase. So with this new capital project, with most of the money coming out of reserves, again, I'm probably just missing, but why don't I see it somewhere? Like in reserves have to be topped up, because that's a pretty big chunk of reserves to be taken out.
So I'll pass it over to Gord, but I can give a short explanation that the explanation of the motion last year to pull money out of reserves to lower the tax impact. If you're using money from reserves to fund ongoing operations, then you do need to find a way to make that money up the following year. If you're taking money from reserves to pay for a one-time project, you don't necessarily need to put that money back.
Okay,
but,
right.
But I'll let Gord give a better explanation than I will.
I would just like to respond to that.
Yeah.
If we're taking, who makes that rule that if we, buy a car, that's okay, but if we pay off a credit card, that's not okay? Is that provincially mandated?
So it's just accounting. So the metaphor that I would use would be if you were taking money out of your savings account to pay your electrical bill monthly, eventually your savings account will be zero and you still have to pay your electrical bill. If you're buying a new dining room table, when you take money out of your savings account to buy the new dining room table, you don't need to put that money back. You have the dining room table, you don't need to rebuy it. It's like an ongoing expense versus a one-time expense.
All right, this has kind of confused me for about 14 years, but what it's... Don't worry, I won't be here for that long. Okay, now, I'll counter that with, I was laid off for a month. I use my savings account to pay my electrical bill one time. Because that was the ask, a one-time, right? Okay, so see where I'm going?
Yep, and then the next month, you still have to pay your electrical bill.
Right,
So
but
you can-
then I'm using my paycheck. I'm not using my reserves anymore,
So that-
my
yeah.
savings account.
So, but you have to find that funding in your own budget to then pay that going forward. So if you lost your job, use your savings account to pay your electrical bill, but you didn't find a new job, you're gonna have to find money month 2, month 3, month 4, month 5.
Right, but what I'm arguing is that it was a one-time, and that was the ask last year, a one-time bailout of a tax increase. Not year after year after year after year, because that would deplete the reserves to zero, then it would go into a negative. But if it's a one-time, why is that against the rules?
So it's not against rules. It would pay down a tax increase for 1 year, but the
Right.
following year, you would have to find the money to pay your power bill again, the increase in your power bill, and then if you had increased costs, you're gonna have to find the money for that. So I'll let Gord try and take over.
No, don't bother, Gord, it's okay. I've been asking the same thing for a long time, and clearly I didn't do well in math, right? But, okay, no, that's fine, guys, thanks.
Any other questions? Okay, so our next item is deputations for items on the current agenda.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We received 5 deputations for this evening. 3 of them were email only. We received email from Walter Matt on behalf of the Bothwell Seniors, Brianna Atkinson, and Todd Lunn. Those were received to council this evening. On the Zoom call this evening, we have Marley Robinson, and then we have 1 present this evening. So Marley, I'll have you go first. As a reminder, each deputation has a maximum of 5 minutes. We don't have the timer on the screen, but I will watch my clock here. So Marley, please go ahead.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, Marley. Thank you.
Okay. So I very much appreciate having the opportunity to speak to you today with my rural resident hat on. Reading through the proposals by councillors and staff that came out related to ways to reduce the Chatham-Kent tax burden, I sort of feel as if I'm living through Groundhog Day, that film where a town keeps reliving the same day over and over and over again. For example, some years ago, the residents of Highgate assembled to voice their need for their library. A few years ago, Ridgetown residents and other small Chatham-Kent communities described how vital our municipal service centers are to older, untechy demographic. Residents have expressed the need for our small rural arenas to be brought up to modern standards. In Ridgetown, the Ridge House Museum, which was a Rotary Centennial project restored and filled with appropriate artifacts donated by town residents, was saved over 10 years ago after several years of being shut. For a while, programming reaching out to the wide community with well-attended monthly tea and talk sessions for older folks, children's programs, music, and memories. And one happy summer, there was a new heritage craft-based exhibition every month. Currently, residents and visitors are drawn to the Heritage Pollinator Garden created by volunteers from the Ridgetown and District Horticultural Society. So the museum is not only valued by locals, but is the only tourist destination in Ridgetown. Now it's suggested that our rural fire stations might be in jeopardy. Currently, Ridgetown matches Chatham in the amount of time it takes to respond to a fire. Should we lose our fire station, we will lose that designation and our insurance will go up, not to mention the likelihood of putting lives and businesses at risk. But here comes Groundhog Day. Once again, we have to ask for the maintenance of our small town libraries, service centers, arenas, and museum. It's deja vu all over again. The tax dollars paid by rural residents should prioritize needs of rural communities. Our payments should fund our needs. This is about basic quality of life. And if the quality of life goes down in our rural communities, no grand schemes in Chatham will help Chatham-Kent be regarded as a valuable place for businesses and families. I and many, many other rural residents ask every councillor to remove cuts on rural services and amenities from options as you consider how to lower our taxes. As you look for savings, do not destroy the quality of life of every Chatham-Kent citizen. And I'm very encouraged to hear the presentations that came out tonight and hope that we will be able to keep our rural services and our rural and Chatham-Kent quality of life. Thank you very much for listening, and I look forward to your future deliberations. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Robinson. Next is Paul Bordeaux. He is representing the CK Museums Advisory Committee.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. As it was just said, I'm Chair of the Chatham-Kent Municipal Museum Advisory Committee, and this deputation is being given on behalf of the committee in opposition to some of the proposed tax cut ideas presented at Council. The tax cut reduction ideas included selling both Ridge House Museum in Ridgetown and Milner House in Chatham, as well as possible museum staff layoffs. These proposals will reduce the ability of the museum to maintain their collection of historic artifacts. They'll reduce the provincial and federal grants presently available for Chatham-Kent museums. They'll reduce the museum function and programming. And it also would send a message to the taxpayers who don't live in the city of Chatham that their needs are secondary. Please follow the advice of municipal staff and the Executive Council and do not adopt any of these cuts. Thanks for your consideration.
Thank you.
Moving to the next item, we have an information report in response to Councillor Doyle's motion. Any questions regarding this report? Councillor Sakachi.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wanted to entertain the following motion that councillor is intending to move an item from the November 13th, 2024 response to Doyle motion report, notify administration through the clerk's office with the item number and the draft motion by Wednesday, November 20th at 3 p.m. so that the clerk can send a list out to the appropriate staff and all of council by Thursday, November 21st at noon, so that staff can be available at the November 26th Budget Committee meeting and that council can consult with the constituents on the matter in advance. This motion is not to take away from any usual Budget Committee practice of always being able to bring forward motions until the budget is approved by the committee and returned to the mayor. And if I have a seconder, I'll just explain very briefly.
We've got lots of seconders. I'll pick Councillor Crew.
I'll second that.
Go ahead, Councillor Anderson. You had a comment? Oh, no. Okay. Continue, Councillor Scotch.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, this is just in summary. Obviously, the report has caused some significant concern in the communities. And I think all this is allowing us as council to be prepared, as well as ensuring the appropriate staff members are on site. The motion is a little bit different than the budget process. With our budget process, we have very detailed tabs. Given the short time, some of the tabs in the report isn't quite as sufficient as we probably could get. So I just think to be short, just so we don't end up in a very challenging circumstance on the floor, as some of these other conversations have been, and that all of us can be prepared, including the staff members. Thank you.
Councillor Crew.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I don't know if this would be a friendly amendment, but I would like to add, and I don't know, you can direct me or guide me, but I'd like to add to that motion that we remove all items or services on the list related directly or indirectly to fire, museums, or libraries on the list. Is that a separate motion?
It's a good question. That might be a budget motion. The report's already made, so there's no recommendations on a list to remove. So the report's already been produced.
Okay. How about,
Yeah,
so.
try again.
Counselor Sakachi's motion says that we let staff know if we want information. So I would like this list to come back without those items on it. Will that work? Here's what I'm, we have a couple weeks until we go through deliberations. I will guarantee that there is not the political will to cut those three things, any of those things from our community. We have heard from the community that they do not want their fire, libraries, or museums closed, among other things. But I think it's a waste of staff time, it's a waste of our time to engage in that if there is no intention on doing it. So, and I totally get where everyone's coming from. This is not my first ugly list. It's not my second neither. So I get it when we have to look at these hard things, but these are things that make up Chatham-Kent. Not Chatham, not Blenheim, not Wheatley, not Tilbury, not Blenheim. This is Chatham-Kent, and these things are the fabric of our community. And I feel that those three things, and I would leave it to staff to look at what's related directly to those three things and bring the list back without.
Yeah, I would just say, I agree with what you're saying. The challenges from a procedural perspective in budget committee deliberations, even without that list existing, someone could make a motion from the floor during budget and say, I want to close the Chatham Museum. And we can't pass a motion to stop or restrict councillors from making those such motions. So whether the list exists or not, a councillor can bring that recommendation forward. I know what you're saying. And if they weren't, if they were recommendations, like if they were staff recommendations, we certainly could say we'd like to remove those recommendations.
Right.
But all they are is information report items.
Okay.
And we, as a council, can't restrict ourselves from bringing them forward during committee
Right.
deliberations. And even if one comes forward, a vote goes one way, we can't restrict ourselves from bringing them back. There's no 2/3 rule during committee deliberations either.
Correct.
So we could vote on the same thing over and over again.
Okay. All right.
So I absolutely understand what you're trying to do. I
Yeah.
just don't think there's a procedural way that we can
Okay.
get there and do it.
No, I totally understand that. Okay. So I guess we just leave it on the list and just, we bring it back. It can come back. Okay. All right, thank you. I guess then that's just kind of a fail right there. But we'll see. Thank you.
But I think the comments are well received. So I think that the spirit of what you're trying to say, I think that it's good for the community to hear that.
All right,
We
thank
have
you.
a bit of a speakers list. We have Councillor Anderson, followed by Councillor McGregor, followed by Councillor Doyle.
Thank you, Mr. Budget Chair. I have a question. I did find some correlations. So council was asked through strong mayor powers for us to compile a list of where we thought that we could bring property taxes down, what our suggestions were. And I did find like some similarities between what I read on that list that was provided to all of us and what the suggestions were from administration. So I'm not sure who I would ask about this. Maybe each department would have done that. Did you see what the direction of council was through that email and decide where you thought that it would be council's direction to provide the list of ways that you would find efficiencies?
I'll pass that to Gord to start.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the list that what council provided to the mayor was provided to EMT back in June, July, when we were having our deliberation. So we've had that all along, and we prepared the budget with whatever recommendations we as EMT wanted to put in it. Most of what you see on the response to the Councillor Doyle's motion is not included in our recommendations, and EMT did not recommend any items on that list. So, but yes, we did have knowledge of what council has suggested all the way through our process.
Thank you. And I think it's important that we maybe highlight a little bit of where the misconception may be coming from, where there is a not suggested list from EMT that kind of similarly correlates with certain suggestions from the council list of where we would have found efficiencies based on the email sent. And I just want to point out, you know, as somebody from a ward that values the rural things and values the bridges and the libraries that we have within all rural wards, I think it's pretty easy for someone from maybe Ward 6 to be able to say that those things should be cut, and that's how they would find efficiencies. And I find that really difficult that when this is put out there, that now, as somebody who is a rural counselor being asked why this is being suggested and why this is being put out there, it does kind of put all of us in a situation where there's a misunderstanding, whether it's based on media or based on how it was reported or how it was put out there, that these are actual recommendations from EMT staff, which it's not. It was each individual counselor that was asked to provide ways that we would find efficiencies, and you can see which each individual counselor said. I just want to put that out there, that there is in no way, shape, or form that me as a rural counselor is sitting there saying that we should close rural libraries, arenas, bridges, roads, culverts, maintenance, or any other services that may have been suggested by other counselors or included in that not suggested EMT report.
Thank you. And I think to your point as well, the next item on the agenda is the council recommendations. So I know that it's two seemingly somewhat related items. And just for clarity to people that are watching, there was, under our new strong mayor powers, the mayor requested in the spring any ideas that councilors might have to forward to be included in the budget that he tables. So those recommendations were received. And if the mayor chose, he could put those into the budget or the other things that he thought were relevant. As we can see, many of those things didn't make it into that budget tabled by administration. And then the second, or the first report we dealt with that's related to Councillor Doyle's motion repeated some of those things that are in some of those councillor recommendations. But again, those weren't recommendations that then came through staff, but staff certainly would have been aware of those. The mayor was aware of those as well and could have included those in the budget if he thought they were consistent with council direction. And I'll take a minute as a Ward 6 councillor to say I certainly don't support those actions, and I know a number of my colleagues in Chatham are shaking their heads and saying that as well. And I've been through this process a couple of times now to see these ugly lists. Often Ward 6 gets some blame for producing them, and it hasn't come from certainly Ward 6 councillors. I have no interest in closing a library or a service center in a rural area, and I'm sure that many of my Ward 6 colleagues agree. So I just wanted to make sure we had an opportunity to say that. I lost my list, but Councillor McGregor was next.
Thank you, and a question here. And before I ask my question, I will say that, you know, it's not my first ugly list that I've seen around these tables either. And, you know, it makes it very difficult for the budget session when we're dealing with these and dealing with the community. And, you know, since this information has come out, I will tell you I've got many emails, and there has not been one that supported any of these cuts. So I have had, every email I've had has been to not support any of these cuts. So just getting that forward. But the one thing that concerns me with a lot of this list and with the council list and direction that's on there, how is this going to affect this term's budget? Because many of these items, in which we've become very good at, and I'm very proud of this, will take community consultation. Community consultation is going to take time, and it is by no means going to affect this budget. So I have a difficulty understanding how we're going to deal with it within this budget when it's not going to affect this budget, because then it's really not part of the budget process. So that concerns me. So when people are reaching out to administration for items on these lists, please consider what needs community consultation, and maybe it comes after budget if you want to deal with that and you want to move forward with that. But please consider what we're actually dealing with, and we're dealing with the budget for 2025, and many of these items cannot happen within that period of time. That's all I'll say. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Doyle?
Thank you, Chair. I would just like to say I agree with Marjorie with the things that you listed. I don't think anybody's going to cut. So I more or less the public seems to think that that was a list of recommendations and things that we will be voting on, which it is not. So a councillor would need to pull one of those and actually bring it up and say, I would like to. This is not going to happen, but I would like to get rid of the volunteer firehouse or libraries or the service centers. I can't see anybody around this table doing that. So just to kind of calm the public down a bit, those, even though Marjorie couldn't make that motion, or Councillor Crew couldn't make that motion, I will say that none of those are going to happen. So hopefully calm the public down a little bit on that. Thank you very much.
Any other questions related to that report or this motion that's before us right now? Just almost questions? Okay. So seeing no further questions, we'll vote by a show of hands. So all in favor of the motion that we see up on the screen?
Councillor Hall?
Yes.
Thank you.
Any opposed? Okay, seeing none, that motion passes. Our next item, we dealt with it a little bit in that conversation, but was the budget directions suggestions from council. So if we have any questions related to that report, any more questions related to that report, Councillor McGrail?
Thank you, Budget Chair McGregor. It's not more of a question, but of just correction, I'm going to say. Council Doyle had referenced me in his emails in regards to my 5 to 10% reduction, and I did not say that. I believe I had put 3%, so you were in agreement with Council McGrail on a 5 to 10% reduction, and that was not my what I had put at all. So I did want to say, and I want to put that on record. And then the second piece is my last comment, and it was more towards buying new buildings and land in that infrastructure part. So I just wanted to, I read that afterwards and I felt I did not make that clear. I am for the downtown center, that piece of it, but I am a little bit weary about buying more lands and schools and such. So I just needed to make that very clear. So thank you.
Thank you, and I think that's helpful to have the report there so that we have it as a budget document as well, so we can clarify those items. Councillor Sakachi?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess I'm not sure who this question is going to go to, if it's to Gord's team or to Mayor Caniff's. So when we have these suggestions like this, if they are something from a longevity standpoint that we can actually look into to see if there's anything that we can do, were those considered as something that we could do, and would we ever be able to receive a response if some of those items are something that would be achievable through, I guess the matrix process?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Like I said, EMT did receive these suggestions and may have, not going through each one of them in detail here, but there may be suggestions that are been incorporated into the budget. We definitely took the suggestion seriously. It is a new process. We hadn't really figured out how to go about it. I think we need to have a debate as council in the spring about how we want to handle it in front of the 26th budget update, and how the mayor wants to receive suggestions then. But this was a work in progress, and just the way the steps went this year, this is the process that we used. There, I believe, were only 9 councillors that responded as well. So we want to hear from everyone around the table with any suggestions. So I think we need to think this through and see if there's a better way to do it for next year.
If I can, maybe just expand on that. I think Mr. Quinton's correct. I think one of the challenges we have is we can't be running off doing reports based on a suggestion from one councillor if the majority of council are not in support. So I think next year the process we'd probably follow is just the same thing. There should be a request from the mayor for suggestions from council, but then I think we need to follow that up. So if there's a motion that one of you wants to make, that staff perhaps look at a particular idea, that'll give us some time to be able to review that, and then it can come back to council in plenty of time for you to be able to look at. Someone made the comment earlier today, I can't remember which councillor, that it was Councillor McGregor, that even some of the things on the last report, we won't have the full extent of the impact because we just haven't had enough time. And some of them, even if you did support it, it might not be able to take effect right away. So I think if we start this process earlier in the spring, and if there are suggestions from council and there's a motion from council that staff come back on a report on a particular savings idea that the majority of you feel is something that we need to pursue, that would be a far better process. Having said that, we did see the list, and there were some things on the list that we considered, but there are other things on the list that that we didn't necessarily consider because we kind of knew that it would end up with some of the comments that some of you made around the table today. But I do acknowledge that I think this is only our second year. First of all, it's our second year in the 4-year budget process, not to make excuses, but it's also our first time dealing with strong mayor powers. So together, we're going to work through that, and I think next year we can produce a better process.
Thank you. And I just wanted to just kind of, I guess I missed the opportunity a little bit in the last, because I moved the motion and I kind of lost my spot. And I just wanted to kind of say a couple things that I guess amalgamate together. It's tough when I know there's a lot of different processes that are going into the budget this is a new experience for me. I'm still learning things as well. But when you bring these lists out and some of the suggestions that you see on here, we're going through an exercise right now that is looking at the ward boundaries and the number of councillors and all that. It's very challenging for our communities in the rural areas and I appreciate Councillor McGregor's sentiment, but it is really challenging for the constituents in the rural areas when they hear about potential cuts, and the majority of them are to the rural areas. And when you hear about the potential loss of representation and it's to the rural areas, a lot of these things that we're talking about affect the fabric of our community, whether that be from a representation standpoint, whether that be from any type of services, and from an infrastructure standpoint. We know that the more heavy utilized infrastructure is in Chatham, but it doesn't make it any more important in the smaller communities. So as a community, I think that the one thing I think that's positive about this exercise is that the community has spoken very loud that they don't want to lose these, but it's about us as council working together. We're all sitting around council for different reasons, but at the end of the day, it's to make our community better. Some might be looking at the bottom line, but other councillors might be looking at what we can do to continue this, to make this community enjoyable, an investable community. And I just think that I hope that these hard things are completed and that we're looking at some of these, and once the budget's processed, that we can start moving forward in a more, congealed manner to try to address some of these concerns. The last thing I just wanted to say is that I do notice in the suggestion list prior to and in this list, there is some focus on the potential reductions of libraries and some reference to the master plans and that. Is that a document, because I would be very honest with you when it comes to the library components of things, I'm not as invested, and I'll be very open and honest and transparent about that. But if we're working on old documents, like we're working at old documents from the recreational master plans we've just looked at a different asset management plan, and maybe I've missed something in one of the meetings, but since the library master plan is such an old document, are we currently working on that? Maybe the question's to you, Mr. Dubin, to refocus our strategies in the rural communities to keep them a viable option?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm going to have to look to Audrey on that one. I know some of the councillors around the table sit on the library board. We certainly are always in favor of updating plans. I think while Audrey's coming up here, many of you before my time were involved in CK 2035, we almost never make reference to that anymore. And I think it's because the community has changed so much. So there's a perfect example of a plan that normally wasn't even supposed to be looked at for a while, but everybody sort of discarded it. So I think you've made a fair point, Councillor, and maybe Audrey can comment on where the library is at in terms of their strategic priorities.
Okay, thank you. Through you, Budget Chair. So great question in terms of master plan for the library. It was last updated in 2008. So correct, we are working with a plan that is now really quite out of date in terms of how the population has changed, in terms of our community change, and also in terms of any growth projections throughout all of Chatham-Kent. So certainly at the Library Board, we do recognise that there is a merit in updating that plan, at least reviewing components of that. And certainly our library team are looking at aspects of all those branches every year, looking at some of the user stats, who's coming through and what those pieces look like. But I would remind Council that last year, well actually earlier this year, the library officially received accreditation from the Ontario Public Library Association, and it does look at data around things of visitor numbers, access to the library. So currently we are meeting all of those benchmarks. So if that is an indicator in terms of the validity of the current master plan, I think it is to some extent a check mark in terms of the library doing well. But I would think overall the library would certainly like to, refresh things, and I think that would be a valid point to make.
Thank you. And just in closing, I think we all can do better at a lot of things, but cuts come at a cost, and we just have to ask ourselves and ask the community at what costs are we prepared to make cuts. And I think that's an important thing to consider during this process, that it's not always about the bottom line. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Scotchy. Councillor Story?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Most of that, my questions were answered through Councillor Sakacci and Gord's response. Just to add that request, I think this being the first year we really had strong mayor powers, since last year they came in right around budget time. There are obviously going to be some growing pains, and I think we felt those growing pains loud and clear, especially through this process. Since I will fully admit I was not clear when that request came through what information we were using, since we didn't have any available to us. I know that information was requested in different contexts. There was quite a tight timeline, and some folks were not comfortable doing that discussion via email versus a public domain, which I completely respect. So I think it just pointed at a few of those growing pains that we need to address going forward. So I would fully support Gord or whoever ends up managing that process for next year, that it's a little more clear and transparent for us. Maybe even something like, okay, in June you're going to be coming to council, or the mayor, whoever it is, with the strong mayor powers. June will be requesting you to provide X, Y, and Z from council, Z, and then in October we do this, November we do that. That way we're a little more prepared, because I think some of the confusion with that list stems from that. So I appreciate that opportunity to share that feedback, and I appreciate the growing pains, and hopefully next year we'll have an even more streamlined process. Thank you.
Mayor Caniff?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a couple things I want to comment on. Mr. Dubin talked about when we looked at all the requests that both council sent in, and it was on the list as well, that it takes a lot of time. There was a lot of time spent with administration actually putting together the list. There was probably a lot more time spent dealing with staff who was very upset, and there was a massive loss of productivity throughout this process. Now, as Mr. Dubin probably spent 20% of his time working on this list, so that 20% of time that he spent there wasn't spent somewhere else. So I always have to be cognizant of we as council what we ask for. So that's why Mr. Dubin filtered a lot of that and said, we could take half of our staff and go off and doing all this stuff, but if we're not going to use it, that's why it's important in the process that we talked about to make sure that council's actually serious about it. I'll repeat it for the 6th time. I've seen a lot of ugly lists, and it was resoundingly turned down every time. I never saw one, and that's why I didn't support it, because I knew that this was what this was going down to, is that based on history. So there's that piece of it. I just wanted to highlight that piece as we move forward. Oh, and sorry, the other piece I want to talk about is I know several people have mentioned, and I know, Mr. Chair, you've mentioned as well, I do not support cutting any services in any part of Chatham-Kent. I'm in a unique position. I get to see everywhere and how important the libraries, the museums, the infrastructure is to everyone. And that's part when I talked about gutting it. I don't want to gut any part of Chatham-Kent. That we are an amazing community. We're growing, and we need to invest in all communities, period. So I won't be supporting anything that's cutting any services to anywhere. Appreciate it. Thanks.
Councillor Harrigan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just very briefly, also echoing that I appreciate the conversations and really I'm looking forward to the improvements for next year as we learn. I also just wanted to point out too that as councillors, I think we shouldn't discount the ability and the opportunity that we have all through the year, 365 days a year, to meet with Michael or executive members of our EMT team to talk about our ideas. And as a councillor, now only in my second term, but I've learned quite often when I bring an idea forward, maybe it's a budget idea that I talk with our CFO, or maybe it's an operational or issue, and infrastructure and engineering usually is where mine come into play. I'll ask the question, is this something that we can do, or is this something that needs a motion for council to consider because it's a bit of a change of direction? And I think staff are really great at giving that feedback and helping us to know what is motions and what is just us giving some operational feedback and then seeing the benefits of that operational feedback. And we often think that applies to, Edward, FYI, I've noticed the bulletin board isn't hanging right in the arena when I was there the other day, but it also can apply to budget ideas, right? And to bring those budget ideas forward. That's not to say that staff are acting without council approval on things, but it helps us to build the relationships with staff so that then when we do go to make motions, they're clear, they're correctly worded, they're able to not cause a stir in the community because we thought recreation services included libraries, but now we say they don't include libraries, right? These are difficult conversations that we have to have that could be prevented if we do take those extra steps to engage with staff. People can read my worry. My worry stands still that if staff send all of council an email to say, give us your ideas, I become concerned as a councillor that those ideas are going to be taken for face value and just implemented, that we're not going to have the public conversation. And I think that it's important if we are talking about budget, we should be talking about budget during budget committee or the spring budget updates or what that looks like, so it is open and transparent. So it's a balance, right, of what that transparency looks like. I think that I would say overall I'm really encouraged by the comments that our CAO made and really look forward to seeing those improvements for next year. And also really look forward to diving into this budget binder and having conversations about what's in this budget binder, because now is the time to look at those services that are being proposed in the 2025 budget. So thank you for that.
Any other comments, questions on that report? Seeing none, I agree, Councillor Harrigan, and I think that the process can be improved. And I also do think that some of our initial concerns when we talked about strong mayor powers, remain. And I think it's a positive in our community that the strong mayor powers haven't been used in a way to unilaterally table a budget without our input. So I appreciate that opportunity that we were given the opportunity to have some early input, and that of course we're going through this budget review process without a strong mayor placing something before us on a table that isn't consistent with our council's strategic priorities. So seeing no other questions or comments, I'll do one more scan. Our last item is a motion for adjournment. So I need someone to move to adjourn. Councillor Harrigan, followed by second by Councillor Finn. So the motion is that the Budget Committee will adjourn to its next meeting to be held on Tuesday, November 26, 2024 at 6 o'clock. And then as per the public notice bylaw, Chatham-Kent Council hereby gives public notice of its intention to hold public meetings and adopt the 2025 annual budget update and pass a resolution to end Council's budget review immediately following receipt of a recommended budget from the Chatham-Kent Budget Committee. Such a resolution would initiate the mayor's opportunity to veto any amendments, or where such veto is waived, result in a final budget. The Budget Committee also gives public notice of the need to meet in closed session at any time during the budget deliberation process as permitted by the Municipal Act 2001. Before I ask for a vote, just a reminder that community consultations are November 20th at noon and November 21st at 7 p.m. on Facebook Live, and we will begin budget deliberations on November 26th at 6 p.m. where we will be accepting deputations. So all in favor of adjourning? Any opposed? Seeing none, motion passes. Thank you.